各位好，欢迎收看凤凰卫视每周台为您带来的天天话题栏目。加州第50号提案呢，这项关乎选举地图重划的议案呢，目前正引发着激烈的辩论。今天呢，我们特别为您邀请到了资深的数据人口学的专家 Fabian Valdez 来解析呢该提案对亚太社区的政治影响力可能造成的深远影响。Fabian, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Fabian, I know you've been knee deep in these maps for a month now, because for many voters, Prop 50 still feels a little technical. Can you start by explaining in simple terms what exactly Prop 50 will change when it comes to how California draws its district lines?
Yeah. So Proposition 50 is going in front of the voters in November as a special election, which has been brought by the Legislative Caucus in California, Democratic Caucus, and Governor Newsom. And the original plan was to have a way of combating what some of the other states in the United States are doing with their redistricting efforts, drawing more Republican districts. And so they wanted to draw some more Democrat districts in California and have put Prop 50 on the ballot for voters to be able to accept or reject. What it means actually is that these new maps have been drawn by groups that are not part of the Independent Redistricting Commission. It's been drawn by potentially some of the DCCC in Washington, also some of the Legislative Caucus potentially. And we know one of the map drawers, Paul Mitchell, is a political consultant here in California who was doing a lot of the drawing as well. And these maps were drawn by politicians for the explicit purpose of gaining Democrat seats. What it means for voters, though, and for residents of California, is these congressional maps are being changed for the next 6 years. So through 2032, when the maps will change again after the census, these maps are being changed to basically favor Democratic incumbents and new Democratic congresspeople.
Right, and that's the part that's confusing for many voters because California actually became the national model for nonpartisan map drawing. So, from your perspective as a data scientist, what risk do you see if Prop 50 passes?
I see this as kind of this is step one, I think, in what could be a real problematic issue for the Redistricting Commission and the gold standard as it is in California and across the nation. You're right. Voters approved in 2011 redistricting, an independent redistricting commission for California. Before that, the politicians would gather in their back offices and they'd cut deals and say, I want this city and I want this county, and they would draw maps to favor themselves. We did away with that in California, and we are the model for it. In fact, other states have followed suit in doing similar independent redistricting commissions. In California, this has led to more competitiveness in our districts. It has led to more people of color being elected, more women being elected, because these maps are being drawn fairly by groups that aren't looking at politics. They're not looking at where somebody lives. They're looking just at what the community wants. Does the community say? And these new maps, as they're being drawn now, goes back to the old way where politicians get to pick what they want. The problem with that is the Democratic Party was fully against the original Prop 11 back when it was put before voters. They didn't want to be able to have voters draw districts with an independent commission. Democrats wanted to keep the power in drawing their own districts. Now, fast forward, they have a reason to suddenly do away with it. And they keep saying this is a temporary pause. They're only going to be doing this for the next 6 years. But who's to say there's not going to be another crisis for them in 6 years where they can then say, well, look, now we need to do this again. It's well known that California has not kept pace in terms of population growth with a lot of other states in the nation. There is a very good likelihood California will lose congressional seats in terms of the number of congressional seats we have in the next census. Well, what are Democrats going to do then? Are they going to say, well, we're lost seats. Now we need to make sure we draw more Democrat seats because we can't lose seats. It's just they're going to come up with one crisis after another to try to keep this power. And everyone knows once, government takes power from the people, they rarely give it back.
Mhm. And you've looked closely at the East San Gabriel Valley, where we have a large and diverse AAPI population, Chinese, Filipino, Vietnamese, Korean, and more, all sharing schools, local businesses, and community organizations. But the maps under Prop 50, they look different. Can you walk us through what those changes would mean in real life?
Sure. East San Gabriel Valley, you have kind of down the 60 freeway, you have this corridor of, like you said, AAPI community. It's kind of runs all the way from Hacienda Heights, Rowland Heights, all the way through to Diamond Bar, Walnut, Chino Hills. And it's kind of this large, drawn out area. Now, traditionally, they have advocated to stay together. Like you said, there's a lot of businesses, a lot of cultural institutions, you have schools, you have a lot of groups that want to be able to stay in the same congressional district and have their voices heard, especially for when it comes to, gaining representation in Congress and having the candidate of their choice. The current maps keep the majority of that together. Walnut, Diamond Bar, all the way down the 60 through Hacienda Heights is in a district together. Chino Hills is separated out. Chino Hills is in a district, though, with Yorba Linda and going into the rest of Orange County into another district. So Walnut, for instance, is in the district with all these other, is in a district that currently has about 21% Asian citizen voting age population. That's an important number because CVAP, or citizen voting age population, is what demographers and map drawers use when looking at Voting Rights Act and racially polarized voting. How can these groups, be used, not be used, but be put together in a way that they've advocated for and that, also gives them a voice. Chino Hills was in a district that was 19% Asian CVAP. These new maps split all those communities. So Walnut goes into another district, Diamond Bar, Rowland Heights, Hacienda Heights stay in another district, and then Chino Hills is in a third. So now they've split this East San Gabriel Valley and the tip of the Inland Empire, and they've split all these communities out into three different districts. Well, Walnut is now in a district that's 3 to 4 points less Asian. Chino Hills is in a district that's 7 points less Asian. So these are areas that they've taken what was a cohesive community that had advocated to stay together and split them apart in order to try to get more Democrat votes.
And that's huge because for viewers watching from Arcadia, Rowland Heights, or Walnut, this isn't abstract. It actually affects who listens to their, concerns on education, small business, or public safety, right?
Right. Congressional representation is important. You want to be able to have someone that not only you want in office, but that would represent your needs as a constituency. And when you're fracturing communities like the Asian community, which isn't just nascent, this is a community that's been there for a long time. When you fracture them, you are essentially telling them your voice isn't as important as the need for us to do this other thing. And in the case of this, it's make Democratic elected Congress people. Your voice is not as important.
hmm And we're seeing something similar up north in Sacramento and Elk Grove, right? That's another growing API hub. Can you describe what's happening there and why it's considered one of the most egregious splits under Prop 50?
Sure. So Sacramento, the city of Sacramento and the southern neighbor Elk Grove has a large AAPI community. They're a pretty large contiguous area that runs from the south of Sacramento, Fruit Ridge Pocket area of Sacramento, and goes all the way south down to the San Joaquin border, San Joaquin County border. Now that group, that community advocated very strongly during the commission. They did testimony and hearings, and they advocated very strongly for being kept together. They wanted to have their voice heard as one, considering they were a large AAPI community. These new maps actually take a good chunk of them out. They grab areas, Fruit Ridge Pocket, Florin, Parkway, Lemon Hill, and they grab these areas, scoop out a good chunk of voters, and they move them to a district that now runs all the way to the Nevada border. And they move them all the way up to South Lake Tahoe and Truckee up there. Now that is egregious because you take these group of Asian voters, you split them, first of all, and then those voters and those citizens who are in that little part that got scooped out, they go from a district that had roughly 22% Asian CVAP, and they're able to have their voice heard, to a district that now has less than 10% Asian CVAP. So they've really gutted the community there and pulled them out and stuck them in a district that has very little to do with downtown Sacramento. We're talking, this is northern, rural county in California near the Nevada border, has very little to do with downtown Sacramento.
It's interesting because California prides itself on inclusion, yet, these changes seem to move us backward in terms of representation. So I just want to clarify, in the Sacramento Elk Grove region, how does Prop 50 affect, contiguity of census tract with major Asian language spoken at home? Are we talking about one or two critical tracts, being severed, or an entire cluster?
This is actually a good chunk of population. The Fruit Ridge Pocket area, Florin, Parkway, we're talking a group of thousands, many thousands of voters, thousands of which are also Asian. And these people are being scooped out. So it's not just a couple of buildings or a couple of people, it's a good chunk of the city is being scooped out.
Mhm. Well, thank you, Fabian. Before we continue, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. 广告过后，更多的关键分析。感谢回来. Welcome back. We're continuing our conversation with demographer Fabian Valdez. So, Fabian, let's talk about data transparency. So right now, the independent commission has to make its mapping data public. The public can literally go online and see how decisions are made. If Prop 50 passes, what happens to that transparency? I mean, under the current system, shapefiles and demographic data are fully public. So any researcher like yourself can reproduce the analysis. Would Prop 50 remove that open data requirement? And just from a data governance standpoint, what risk does that pose?
Well, the data itself will still be available. They will still have to make available to the public shape files, block files, and these types of things. But there are some key differences in the data that will be missing. The commission, when they did their drawing, released a report of every single district and the reasons they drew those districts, including community testimony, geographic concerns, anything having to do with agriculture, anything that they were looking at when they drew a district. They released a report saying, we drew this district for this reason. That will not be released, at least as far as I can tell, by these Prop 50 maps. It has not been released yet and doesn't look like it will be. Also, when the commission drew their lines, they had racially polarized voting analysis done. And this is very important for, complying with VRA, which is the Voting Rights Act nationwide, and making sure that these analyses are done and, that they're not drawing districts that would in any way split communities that need to have their voice heard, minority communities. As far as we know, racially polarized voting has not been, submitted to the legislature for these new maps. So we have not seen that, and that won't be going to the public as well. And furthermore, you have all of the testimony and previous maps the commission drew. It was an iterative process for the commission. They would go to an area, they would draw some maps, they would hear community testimony, they would tweak it, they would adjust it, they would make changes based on what people were asking for. These Prop 50 maps had nothing of the sort. So you will not be seeing any previous maps, any understanding of the reasons they drew certain things, and you won't know what community testimony they were relying on to draw anything.
And that lack of transparency, is that how political influence sneaks back in? Because, a lot of people still remember when maps were drawn behind closed doors decades ago.
Yeah, this is exactly how that happens. You have Sacramento coming in and saying, we need to draw these maps this way. And there is anecdotal evidence, whether the map drawers knew it or not, where they are specifically helping out, Senate members that are terming out that suddenly have a district, or congressional members that suddenly are perfectly in their district and not in the district with some other competitor. You have these situations where these people are drawing the lines for themselves. And this, like you said, this is really reminiscent of what was happening 20, 30 years ago when the government drew the lines themselves. They were choosing their voters, and the voters weren't choosing their congressional members.
Now, you mentioned something earlier that kind of struck me that, maps are more, just, more than just lines. There are stories about who gets hurt and who gets left out. So for Asian American communities, many of which are still learning how to navigate political systems, what's the long-term impact if these maps, actually split their neighborhoods?
Long term, there's potential for some real issues. When you think about politics, especially things as high as Congress, you don't just get elected to Congress. Usually those people start at the lower end. They start at school board, they start, at water boards, and they move up to city councils and mayors, and then maybe supervisors, and they kind of move up the chain. When you split communities like this, you are basically not giving them the opportunity to really build their bench. And when I say bench, think of it like a baseball team to really build their competition, to build who they want in the political system up by not giving them the chance to go through this. And when you're split these communities up now, you are suddenly sitting in a situation where the candidates who, 5 years ago were moving their way up no longer have a place to run. And the candidates who are now starting to move their way up don't know what's going to be the future of these districts. And so you get people who start to fall out of the cracks. Maybe they don't feel like they want to run anymore. You also have the issue of, well, maybe we had a candidate who's going to run for Congress, but they're no longer viable here, so another candidate's going to come in. Now, what that means for especially the Asian community, in a lot of districts, the Asian community isn't 50% of the vote. So they're not going to be able necessarily to just hands down win what they want. So they're splitting their vote across candidates in a primary. And in a district where maybe there's a Hispanic majority, well, the Hispanic majority might be able to pick the candidate. And if that is not the candidate the Asian community wants, well, they don't have a choice. The Hispanic community has chosen what they want. So when you're splitting these communities, you're not giving them the opportunity to choose who they would like to see as their congressional representative.
Hmm. And when people feel, their votes don't count, they stop showing up. That's actually dangerous for democracy. Now, I want to play devil's advocate for a moment. Some supporters of Prop 50 argue that state lawmakers understand communities better than commissions. How do you respond to that?
I would argue that I have full understanding that when somebody is elected to a district, they really probably know their community. I have a hard time thinking that Assembly and Senate members in California legislature don't know anything about their communities. I think they absolutely know their communities. However, it's not just about knowing your community, it's about knowing all the communities around you. When the commission's drawing maps, they're not drawing just for one area. They're drawing the entire state. And what that means is there's pull, there's give and play. So while someone may know, for instance, Walnut very well, that doesn't mean they know everything up to Monrovia. Or it doesn't mean they know all the way out to San Bernardino. It doesn't mean they know down to Irvine. But when the commission's drawing maps, they have to keep Walnut in the context of all that larger region. They have to know San Gabriel Valley. They have to know East San Gabriel Valley. They have to know Inland Empire. They have to know what all that region looks like and what that region wants. And so, yes, I'm not denying that these, legislators in California know their communities, but the commission is not looking at just single areas. They're looking at everything, as a whole, very holistically.
So essentially, giving map drawing power back to politicians means letting them choose their voters instead of voters choosing them.
That exactly what's happening. The politicians are drawing maps and picking and choosing who they want in their districts and drawing districts specifically for candidates versus the commission was listening to the community and allowing the community to draw the districts that they think they deserved in order to pick the representation they wanted.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much, Fabian, for joining us and helping us decode this critical issue before voters head to the polls.
Yeah, thank you.